Support for Gulf States Gumbo comes from the Britannia Theater, uptown in New Orleans, playing new movies, classics, and unique programming. Join the Britannia for Downton Abbey and One Battle After Another on 70mm film. Information at thebritannia.com for all showtimes.
From the Gulf States Newsroom, this is the Gulf States Gumbo, your weekly serving of stories from Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. I'm Ryan Vasquez, chopping it up this week. On today's show, we're talking about jobs on their way to the Gulf South. We got Space Command going to Alabama and Hyundai in Louisiana. What's not so clear is who is going to get those jobs. To help us answer that is our economic mobility reporter, Stephen Bazaha. Good to have you here.
Hey, good to be with you, Ryan.
So, Stephen, let's start with Huntsville and Space Command. I've heard a lot about Space Command, but what actually is it?
Well, it's actually easy to mix up Space Command and Space Force. Space Force got all this attention as the first branch of the armed services created since 1947, so pretty big deal. Think of like how, the Air Force has the air, Army has land, and the Navy has sea. Space Force has space. But conflict, is not always so cut and dry. Like, there are planes on aircraft carriers in the sea. These different theaters of war tend to cross over. So that's where Space Command is. Space Command organizes across different parts of the military for operations in space.
So to be clear, we're not talking about starships fighting in space and all that, right?
No, this is not sci-fi. More often what we're talking about here is like satellites. Satellites are incredibly important for eyes on the battlefield and internet connections and whatnot. So as they grow in importance, it's more essential to defend those assets.
So this will be a big deal for Huntsville, right?
Yes and no. I mean, it would mean more than 1,000 jobs coming to Huntsville, and a big prize for Huntsville would be to claim such a high-profile headquarters. But it's not enough to really transform the city. It already has this huge defense and space sector, both private and public. And tons of other federal headquarters have already been moving there for decades, like the Army Materiel Command, the Missile Defense Agency, and more than 1,800 FBI jobs. Now, this does not mean all those moves went smoothly. Let's go back to 2018. At the time, the FBI's Finance and Facilities Division was based in D.C. The agency called in all of the division's roughly 100 workers into an auditorium to share the news. They were all moving to Huntsville. Sharonda Ware was working there at the time.
You know how they have these town halls and, there have been people lately who've been kind of throwing rotten tomatoes, just really rah! That was what that was like.
Sharonda personally was concerned about Alabama's long history and reputation when it comes to race.
Especially as a Black woman, is this going to be a danger for my family or myself?
Do you know, the percent of your division that decided to move to Huntsville?
If I were to guess, only 10% moved.
Oh, that's small.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, that is kind of small. That's also just her guess. Did you just confirm that number?
Yeah, I did reach out to the FBI, and that does generally fit with what they've said about relocations. About 10 to 30% of its staff in the past agreed to relocate to Huntsville.
And how does this connect back with Space Command?
Well, yeah, this concern about people not relocating to Huntsville is also a concern with Space Command. The move to Huntsville has been talked about for years, and you could see the relocation worries in this Defense Department Inspector General report from earlier this year. It showed that command leadership worried that a majority of its 1,000 civilian workers, contractors, and reservists might not relocate to Alabama.
Is this all about workers not wanting to move to the South?
Actually, it is not. I looked up some census numbers on this, and if you look at how many Americans moved to Alabama relative to the state's population in 2023, it was actually above the national average. Mississippi, by the way, was right around that midpoint, and Louisiana was near the bottom. Really, part of the challenge is that Americans across the country are moving at a record low.
Okay, so why are fewer Americans moving?
Yeah, to find that, I got on the line Urvi Neelakatan. She's a senior policy economist with the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. She co-authored this brief about this moving decline, and she got interested in this topic because moving away has long been a big part of the American story.
And we just stopped seeing that. Such a traditional part of the life cycle is not happening anymore, and we really wanted to know why.
I know I've at least moved, I think, 3 times to different states for work.
Probably about the same for me, although I returned to the state that I was from in between those jobs.
Yeah, we can still count that.
So what reasons did she give you for the moving drop?
Well, one is that Americans have basically been more often sticking to certain parts of the country based on things like industry and education. Like college grads are more likely to stay in cities, tech bros, hanging out in the Bay Area, and Huntsville has become this gathering spot for engineers. You could also say the U.S. is more politically sorted, too. I checked out this Realtor.com survey, and it found that over 40% of Americans said politics influenced where they decided to live. Another surprise reason Irvi gives me for Americans staying put is that women are working more, which, that might sound like a weird explanation, but hear me out and imagine a husband and a wife. Husband works outside the home, wife stays home.
So a moving decision based on work is only based on one spouse's job. Now imagine that there are more women in the workplace.
And there are more marriages where both partners are working. That means moving for one person's career might mean the other person have to giving up their own. That is not an easy decision, so it makes sense those couples would be less likely to move. And it is a bit easier if one partner makes a lot more than the other, but that just leads to another reason for the moving drop. The gender pay gap is closing.
Closing, but not exactly close, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, the big caveat here is that, median wages for women are still about 85% of what men get paid. But yes, this is better than in like the 90s when it was more like 70 to 75%. And if both partners are making similar salaries, how do you pick whose career gets prioritized? It might be easier just to stay put. And, this all gets more complicated when you add a kid to the equation. I mean, you might want to stick close to the grandparents for that childcare support if both parents are working.
That's a lot of reasons someone might choose not to move. What about all the good reasons, though? Like going to a place with higher pay?
Okay, so that was what was interesting was that when you compare similar jobs across different places, there isn't actually that much of a difference as there used to be. I mean, yes, New Yorkers are still making more on average than, like workers in the South.
Although we do have better weather down here.
Yeah, if you're not counting the hurricanes, but we got the crawfish boils and all of that too. But generally, Irvi points to research that says when comparing similar jobs between states, the salary gap has been shrinking.
So, it used to be that people would throng to places where prospects were better. But as places get more even, then there's less of a pull to move to better opportunities because now you can get good jobs at where you live right now.
I mean, given all that, it sounds like there aren't any reasons to move.
Well, cost of living is still the big one. Like, let's go back to Huntsville, Alabama. That city is growing fast, and a big part of it is that it's relatively affordable. According to Wallet Hub, housing costs are about 30% lower than in Colorado Springs. That, again, is where Space Command is coming from. And those cheaper costs were a big part of the Air Force's recommendation to move Space Command to Huntsville way back in 2021. And, if you remember Sharonda Ware, the FBI worker who was told she needed to leave D.C. for Huntsville?
Yeah. Did she decide to make the move or stay in D.C.?
She did, in fact, move. And, she did still have some concerns about racism in Alabama. But she was won over by the state's beautiful rivers and mountains and its culture.
People are more willing to be like, good morning, how are you? Oh, it's raining out there. Just being able to talk to other people, that's how I am. So I just love to be able to do that with other people too.
So that Southern hospitality got to you.
That part, yep.
Sharonda is no longer with the FBI. She took part in that federal deferred resignation program at the start of the year, and she's deciding with her husband what they're going to do next. One thing that is not in the cards is moving again. She says Huntsville is home.
You're listening to the Gulf States Gumbo. I'm Ryan Vasquez, and we're talking jobs coming to the Gulf South with our economic mobility reporter, Stephen Basaha. So, Stephen, what other jobs you got for us?
Okay, for these next jobs, we have to zoom back to a big announcement from last March. The South Korean car maker Hyundai committed $21 billion to U.S. manufacturing. And that was later bumped actually up to $26 billion. And that money included for Louisiana a new steel mill at the cost of nearly $6 billion. This Hyundai investment is big enough that when it was announced, President Trump, he rolled out that gold White House carpet. And, Trump got to claim it as a win for his policies.
This investment is a clear demonstration that tariffs very strongly work.
House Speaker and Louisiana Congressman Mike Johnson was also there and claimed it as a win for his state.
We're so grateful for these great friends with Hyundai to invest in Louisiana. We have
And Hyundai Executive Chairman Yoo-Sun Chung was also there, claiming it as a win for both Hyundai and American workers.
All of these efforts will accelerate the localization of our supply chain in the U.S., expand our operations, and grow our American workforce.
But then, 6 months later,
we're following a massive ICE raid at a Hyundai plant in Georgia. Officials say roughly 450 undocumented migrants were apprehended. Now, Thursday's raid.
Yeah, so last month, South Korean workers were swept up in an immigration raid at, this Georgia battery plant that was jointly owned by both Hyundai and LG. U.S. government officials accused the workers of being in the country illegally.
So how does that tie back to Hyundai's investments in Louisiana?
Well, it opened up this new line of criticism for that steel plant from Ashley Gaynard. I mean, she's the president of Rural Roots Louisiana. It's this advocacy group in Ascension Parish where Hyundai plans to build that new steel mill.
I think the whole project needs to be on hold until you equip these people here to even work at that.
Ashley first opposed the plant over environmental concerns, but after that raid, she joined the Louisiana Bucket Brigade in a new criticism. They called on Governor Jeff Landry to pull back on state subsidies for the plant, saying those jobs wouldn't go to Louisiana residents. Now, the South Koreans who were arrested were there helping build the Georgia battery plant, not necessarily assigned to permanent jobs for when that plant's operating. But Ashley said that's still a problem.
That's how we got so much illegals right now. Because that's who come into our country on work visas, and they don't go home.
Believe me, these people would rather be in South Korea than here.
That second voice there is A.J. Jacobs. He's with East Carolina University, and he's a historian who's wrote multiple volumes on the Korean auto industry. He says the workers that are being brought in are not looking to stay in the U.S.
Their families are in South Korea. Their families aren't here. Their families are not coming with them. So imagine you have a wife and 2 kids and you have to go for 3 months somewhere else and you don't see them. So of course they want to go home.
Now, that raid in Georgia was pretty shocking. Does AJ think that might cause Hyundai to rethink their plans in the U.S.?
Well, in short, no. He says Hyundai makes way too much money in the States for that to happen.
They are heavily committed to the United States. Outside of South Korea, it's the biggest market that they have by far. Why would you purposely or accidentally do anything that would jeopardize that?
As for, those permanent jobs that will come after the steel mill is built, he says those will go to Americans. After all, foreign car makers across the South already employ tens of thousands of American workers.
So what did the parish and Hyundai have to say about this?
Well, I reached out and got in touch with Ascension Parish's communication office, and they said these plants are in fact hiring local workers, and it pointed me to workforce development happening at the Louisiana Tech Colleges and the River Parish's Community College, which are working together to create a new training center to prep local talent to work at the steel mill. As for Hyundai, a spokesperson said in an email to me that the company's investing heavily in workforce development in the U.S. and making thousands of high-quality American jobs.
Stephen Basaha is our economic mobility reporter. Stephen, thanks for talking to me.
Thanks for having me, Ryan.
This week's show is cooked up by the Gulf States Newsroom team. Our theme music is by DJ Supreme. Special thanks to our partner stations, WBHM, Mississippi Public Broadcasting, WWNO, and WRKF. You can find us in your podcast feeds every Friday. Look us up and be sure to subscribe. Again, I'm your host, Ryan Vasquez. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to stir your room.